Of all the car companies out there, can you name one that was founded by a woman? Spoiler alert, you can't. General Motors has a female CEO and has for 4 years, but GM and all the other companies were founded by men. Today we're talking about Geraldine Elizabeth Carmichael, who founded the 20th Century Motor Car Corporation in 1974, and why you don't see her cars on the road. Welcome to Legion Weirdos, where you get your party conversation education. I'm Christopher, your Martha Stewart of Weird, and you and I, we're the Weirdos. If you're looking for more interesting topics of conversation to up your social situation, click that subscribe button. This is the Dale, a three-wheeled concept car advertised in 1974 to achieve 70 miles per gallon and cost less than a VW Beetle. It was offered by the 20th Century Motor Car Corporation, not to be confused with the 20th Century Motor Company from Atlas Shrugged. It was about the size of the current Accord, but it supposedly weighed less than 1,000 pounds, and despite its size and weight, it was touted as the safest car of its era. In fact, Carmichael claimed to have personally crash tested one at 30 miles an hour into a wall with no injuries or damage. It was to get power from a 2-cylinder BMW engine rated at 40 horsepower that could achieve 85 miles per hour. The closest successful car company to compare to this would be England's Reliant, who made 3 models of three-wheeled cars. They made three-wheeled cars from 1953 to 2001. Sometimes their waiting lists were over a year long, but they had their obvious disadvantage.
No, not again.
That wasn't supposed to happen to the Dale, though, because of its low center of gravity. In fact, the brochure said it's impossible for the Dale to roll over, and it won't spin out even on the sharpest curve. It also claimed the car rides like a rocket, yet it's built like a tank, and even a sledgehammer wouldn't dent the body because it's made out of something called rocket structural resin. If you've never heard of rocket structural resin, it's because it doesn't exist. The windows were to be made of Rigidex, which does exist, but it's not opaque. Oh, and supposedly there were no internal electrical wires because everything was on a printed circuit board. Even to the headlights and taillights, that's a big circuit board. For the customer's peace of mind, the car came with a 15-month, 15,000-mile warranty. Something in the brochure that might interest motorcycle people is the BMW flat twin engine shown mounted nose down, which means the drive shaft is straight up, the oil pan is sideways, and I don't know a lot about downdraft carburetors, but I don't think they work on their side. Also didn't find anything about how they solved the possibility of an engine fire from the gas leaking out of the carburetor. Plus, the engine was supposedly air-cooled, but it was sealed away in that resin body. No way for air to get to it. Cars of its time that were air-cooled had big vents in the back to suck in air to cool off the engines. Maybe the lack of oxygen is how they kept the engine fires from spreading. And with all this critique, it's taken me until now to point out the American Motors door handles and the Firebird tail lights. The car was designed by a man named Dale Clifft, who sold it to 20th Century on the promise of $3 million when the car went into production. 20th Century also advertised other models like the Revell and the Vanagon. They're both totally fiction. Depending on which story you read, only 2 or 3 prototypes were built, and that's it. Back in 1974, Car and Driver magazine went to check the car out at its supposed manufacturing plant, and when no one was around, they looked under the hood to find a Briggs & Stratton motor. The show car in the office had no drivetrain. The wheels were bolted to 2x4. Things really started falling apart for the company in 1975 when their PR director, William Miller, was murdered by another employee. California authorities seized the company's assets, but Carmichael hightailed it to Dallas before she was indicted on fraud charges. From Dallas, she fled to Miami, and when investigators searched her Dallas home, they found things like wigs, hair remover, padded bras, and something they described as a device used by female impersonators to disguise their sex. They found out Liz Carmichael, who claimed to be a Midwestern mother of 5, widowed by a deceased NASA engineer, was actually born as Jerry Dean Michael, a man who'd been wanted on counterfeiting charges since 1961. Carmichael did have 5 kids, 2 boys and 3 girls, who she fathered back when she was still Jerry with her then wife Vivian. According to People magazine, they continued to live together, and Carmichael would often refer to her as her secretary. After her arrest in Miami, in the months before her trial, Carmichael spent her time in jail studying studying law and then later represented herself in court and was convicted on 26 counts. According to Auto Week, Carmichael claimed to be persecuted by the auto industry and the government. I'm dangerous to people in the establishment, basically because I challenge people in the establishment. She spent 3 unsuccessful years on appeals, and then right before her prison sentence started, she skipped bail and was on the lam for 9 years. Why do they let convicted criminals out on bail anyway? By the way, that bail had been financed by the TV station KABC in exchange for the rights to her story. In 1989, Carmichael was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries, and then a few weeks later, the mystery was solved when she was identified as roadside flower vendor Catherine Elizabeth Johnson in the Texas town of Dale. Carmichael has also gone by the names Jerry Barrett, Mike Moran, Mike Morgan, William Tracy Parker, and William Richard Raines. She was placed in a men's prison facility, served a 2-year sentence, and died in 2004. And I'm curious about what happened in that decade between the prison sentence and when she died. Did she just like sink away into a life of innocent obscurity, or did something else go on? I haven't found any information about that. The promise of the Dale automobile and the scam that surrounded it brought in millions of dollars. What happened to all that money? In the end, the designer Dale Clifft only got $1,001 and also got a check for $2,000 that bounced. I guess fortunately he avoided all the controversy around the car, but unfortunately he died at the age of 49 in 1981. The Dale that has an actual interior and real windows is on display at the Peterson Automotive Museum in LA. The less detailed prototype is ironically displayed at the Speedway Motors Museum of American Speed in Lincoln, Nebraska. According to Car and Driver, there's a third prototype in private hands. And a couple years ago, a 14-inch long design model showed up as somebody's find on the Collectors Weekly website. An indie filmmaker by the name of Nick Camilleri is apparently trying to put together financing for a movie about Carmichael called The Rose Lady. Not really sure how that's going to work if ABC owns the rights to the story, but I'll link his Indiegogo in the description. On the screen are some videos YouTube picked out for you. Shout out to my Patreon peeps, Gma, Lolly, and Jen. Until next time, stay weird and stay out of the comfort zones.